Okay, folks. I thought that it's 5 after, so we'll get started. I'm sure that there will be more people joining us. My name is Pam Wilmot. I'm Executive Director of Common Cause Massachusetts. We have several other members of the Election Modernization Coalition also on the line with us, and I know at least one, Cheryl Crawford from Mass Vote, who is hoping to be here but is driving and may be able to join us a little bit later. So you're joining the webinar for the Grassroots Training for the Early Voting Challenge, and today we hope to, we're hoping to get folks to up to speed about the current law that was passed for early voting, what we're asking folks to do, and how you can help. So I'm going to start off. This is a coalition effort. Common Cause has prepared a lot of the materials, but all the other organizations, the League of Women Voters, Mass Vote, Mass Purg, ACLU, the voter table, and to a lesser, and MIRA and Progressive Mass have also been helpful in the process and will continue to be. And so I thought I would ask if we can manage the technology, if some of the other folks who are on the phone, on the call from the coalition, might want to introduce themselves and just say a moment about why this is important. Nancy, you want to say something? If you can.
Can you
Yep,
hear me?
I can hear you. Yep.
Okay. This is Nancy Brumback. I'm with the League of Women Voters in Massachusetts, and I don't know if Mary Ann Ashton is also on the line. So the two of us are here, and the League thinks this is very important, and we're trying to get our local leagues to talk to their clerks and town clerks, city election officials to get a robust early voting program in place.
Sounds good.
Back to you, Pam.
All right. I understand that Cheryl is on the phone, but doesn't have a pin, and I do not actually see her, so we can't let her talk, but maybe when she gets to a computer, she can, we'll see her, and then we'll let her have her say. Eric Cashton from our office at Common Cause is also here and has done a lot of work to put this together. So do you want to just say a quick hi, Eric?
Hello, everybody. It's good to virtually meet you.
Okay, well, we will get going now. And as you go along, if folks have questions, we will have question answer period. We'll take all of your questions, but if you have them, you can raise your hand if it's urgent, and we will try to answer them. So we are at the, our plan for today. We just did some introductions. We're going to go over the implementation, first what the early voting law is, our recommendations for implementation, our little contest that we're running called the Early Voting Challenge, what training volunteers looks like, and giving you a chance for answering your questions. So the Massachusetts early voting law was passed as part of a comprehensive election modernization package that the coalition had worked for many, many years. It was a priority of organizations for at least 3 years. Common Cause wrote the first drafts of some of the signature provisions back in 2004. So for us, this has been a decade-long push, and certainly other organizations have been involved since that time as well. The comprehensive package provided for many different reforms. Some of the highlights are online voter registration, which allows voters that have interact with the DMV and have either an ID or a driver's license to register to vote online or to update their voter registration. a really important reform that went into effect last August. Pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. It allows our young people to pre-register to vote. They can't vote until they're 18, but it allows folks who are going to get a driver's license to register at that time. It allows for high school to do drives, and it is a proven reform in other states to boost participation. That goes into effect this coming August. Procedures for audits of election equipment. Election equipment can be tampered with. It can be misprogrammed by accident. And we know that the numbers are really critical. For any other procedure where numbers are critical, there are random audits. 20 plus states are already doing audits in this way. And Massachusetts will start at the presidential election doing a 3% random audit of precincts. That's a fairly standard procedure. We're not at the gold standard, which is a mixed percentage depending on how close the election is, but eventually we'll get there. There are a number of other provisions that dealt with fixing some issues around election administration, including training and dealing with inactive voting reforms. With procedures which meant that too many people are on inactive voting lists. But a big part of it was to institute a 11-day period starting 2 weeks before the election of early voting. Massachusetts is way behind in terms of getting early voting, and this is a big step combined with all the other reforms in the right direction. Of course, there's things we'd still like to do, like automatic voter registration and election day voter registration, but definitely a big step. Massachusetts is one of the last states to adopt this reform. 34 other states already have early voting, and it has been proven to particularly in low-income neighborhoods and those where people move a lot, to help and to help boost some participation. So what our early voting law requires is that 11 business days prior to the election, which is 2 weeks, that includes one weekend, but not the last one. It actually ends the Friday before the election. It requires cities and towns to provide at least one early voting site open during normal business hours for early voting. The law does allow cities and towns to provide for extra hours and locations, but it says that they don't have to do that. Now you can imagine why did the legislature do this? It's because Massachusetts cities and towns have very different populations, very different communities. So we have the town of Gosnold and Monroe, which have under 100 residents, and then we have the city of Boston, which is approaching 700,000 residents. So having one place to vote for our smaller cities and our smaller towns, I should say, makes perfect sense. But having only one place for our biggest cities makes no sense at all. The law also says that communities don't have to have a police officer present during early voting sites. But it doesn't say anything about who else needs to be there. You can imagine that a town clerk or a town clerk and a helper alone might suffice for some of our smaller communities. But in our bigger ones, depending on how many other sites they have or how busy it's likely to be, they might need quite a few workers. But there's no requirement that they have the same 6 plus the warden and the assistant warden that are required during the actual election day and the police officer. So what doesn't it do? As I said, they don't specify how this is going to happen exactly, other than the ballot actually looks very much like an absentee ballot, but you don't have to have the excuses. And it doesn't specify, as I just said, and this is really the focus of what we're looking at, how many sites and hours that early voting needs to be available. So why are we doing this? As I mentioned a little bit earlier, this is really about expanding access to our democracy and providing more opportunities to vote. It's also about shortening the lines at busy polling locations. In Boston, some voters had to wait up to 3 hours in the last presidential election. In Worcester and Springfield, several precincts had 2-hour-long waits. We had similar ones in a couple of precincts in Lawrence, and hour waits in many other urban locations. That's just too long. Our president says nobody should have to wait more than 30 minutes, and we think that's a great benchmark. There's evidence that once this is instituted, that it can actually make elections more manageable, and election administrators tend to actually like it over the long haul. You know, change is difficult. I'm sure you'll find a lot of pushback once you contact folks at this point, but give them a couple of elections, and I think they'll come around to our viewpoint. So in order to really ensure access to democracy, you know, all of us are so busy. We have so many things to do in our lives. Some folks have multiple jobs, they have kids, and the current law requires that you have an excuse in order to vote early. You have to get an absentee ballot, and you have to say, under pains and penalties of perjury, that you are either physically disabled, you're not going to be in your city and town on election day, or you have a religious reason for not voting. Most of us, some of us may have those excuses, many of them don't. It's really silly. We should be able to make voting more accessible for more people, and as I said, 34 states already do this. But in order to make it accessible, we have to have adequate opportunities to actually make it work, and that means having enough hours. Because if you're saying, oh yeah, you can vote early, but in the city of Boston, you have to come downtown from 9 to 5 during a weekday, it makes it very difficult for folks that are working during those hours, and where getting downtown can take a while. So we want to spread that out and encourage site selection that might be somewhat different and allow people many opportunities, just like they do in other states. So we compiled the best practices as we looked at these other states and studied what they did. And based on the average and best practices elsewhere, the standard we recommend is 1 voting site for each 35,000 people. This is a sort of a minimum standard, except for the city of Boston, which is so large in terms of size and so dense that 17 locations is probably more than we need. But other places, we have very few cities and towns that are bigger than 70,000. That would be the big 3, really, and a couple others. And in fact, there's only 43 municipalities that are bigger than 35,000. But for those larger communities, they need to have multiple sites, in our opinion. We hope that they'll consider some non-traditional locations, places where people will frequent normally, that have, of course, access to public transportation, access to parking, be easily recognizable, have disability access, and floor plans that don't create bottlenecks. But those are not necessarily difficult standards to meet. I think many of the election administrators will have ideas already about where they want to do it. But sometimes they're going to need a little push to do a little more than they might have initially thought about. We're also hoping that each early voting location, and this is more of a jump, will have all of the different kinds of ballots for a given municipality at each site, rather than saying, you know, unlike your precinct, you have to go to early voting polling location X, which could get really confusing very quickly. It's also an opportunity to try out something that many other states do, even during the election, which is to allow greater flexibility for folks to go where it's close to their work or close to where they exercise or any of the other, and to sort of start loosening that precinct requirement. And we can do that because we do have all this information now on a database that is accessible from anywhere. So specifically, in addition to the 35,000 population having an additional polling place, we also want everybody to provide some evening and weekend hours. So then that's because people are often very busy during the day, and having those evening hours and weekend hours are for some folks the only times they can really get there. We know from voting that the busiest times are always in the early morning or in after work hours. So we'd like to have that happen in early voting as well. One way that a municipality who is even a smaller one could accommodate this request is just by shifting some of their town hall hours into the evening, and many communities already do that. The advertising piece isn't something that we need to do a lot of work around, but it's really critical that people know that there's early voting and they know where to go. Otherwise, they're not going to be taking advantage of this new opportunity. So paying attention to what your community is going to do to advertise this new opportunity and where people need to go is really important. And there's lots of different ways of doing that, including things that don't actually cost money, but having press conferences, doing flyers and signs and things like that, in addition to the classic advertisement and announcements and things like that. So our campaign is really to get municipalities to embrace these standards. And to do that, we have a little bit of a small carrot. It's a pretty small carrot, but sometimes that's appreciated. So communities that embrace these standards will get little gold and silver medals to put on their website. And for the silver medal, that's at least one early voting site for each $35,000, and have evening hours at least one time per week and 4 more hours during the weekend. For the gold medal, that's again one site for every 35,000, having evening hours at least 2 times per week and at least 6 hours of early voting. So I think there's going to be some questions and some judgment calls, like some of the sites may have hours at this time, the other ones don't, and we can work as we go forward. But this is just a little opportunity for us to showcase those communities that really embrace this challenge and do a great job. So the Early Voting Challenge was launched on November 5th. We had a coalition, had a press conference. We had sent out emails to the city and town clerks in all 351 communities. We had a smaller email set to those that have larger populations than 35,000. I have to say that we've had some mixed reactions. We've had some positive reactions. Oh yes, our town is definitely going for the gold. And we've had some negative reactions, like how dare you tell us what to do, you know nothing. The city of Worcester recently considered a plan, and they're looking at 5 different locations, which is about our number, and definitely evening and weekend hours. They may be spreading some things around, and it wasn't totally clear to me how they're doing the ballot access for each location, whether it's specific only to that area of the city. We'll need to follow up a little more on that. Somerville considered a proposal to embrace the challenge at their city council, but nothing happened. and we've heard dribs and drabs from other communities. So as part of the early voting challenge, we've also reached out to our volunteers in all of our organizations. We had a large training in Boston about a month ago. We had about 60 people from all over the state, but mostly in the bigger cities, Boston, Worcester, Chelsea, and a few others. But and we've certainly done email outreach and the rest. We're going to continue to do that. But what we're really looking for folks to do is to form local organizing committees to pressure their own elected officials around the goals and standards of the early voting challenge. Certainly, a lot of communities are making their budgets at the moment, and some of this is a resource allocation issue. We found, again, it depends on how many poll workers they're planning to hire. Our study of other states was about for 8 hours and printing ballots, which actually in Massachusetts is going to be done by the secretary, was an average of just over $300 a day. With taking the printed ballots off, it was much less than that. So what can you do? We'd like you to join a team of fellow activists from your hometown or start one. To work together to identify best strategies, whether you need to go, whether officials are receptive and you can work just in that direction, or whether you need to put in a warrant article if you're in a town. To meet with your local officials after writing letters and doing, after you do some of this groundwork, to do some probably PR around it. That includes the local newspapers and attending community meetings, pushing for this. We have a toolkit that provides sample letters to the editor and all the information you're hearing on this webinar, the standards and other guidance from the coalition. Oh, here's the volunteer toolkit, sorry. As I said, it has, I think one other thing I didn't say, it has sample talking points and as well as a walkthrough of the process. Frequently asked questions, also tips how to lobby, as well as a sample warrant article in addition to the other things I mentioned. So some of the things that as you're getting together with other folks, you might want to think about is how these standards apply to your own community. Are you a small community or are you a large community? And how did budgetary decisions get made in your town? Is this something that the mayor proposes and pretty much has control over? Who makes the actual decisions? Do you need to get a warrant article, or is it something that you can convince the select board to propose themselves? Who do you know and who do your friends know or companions that you can put together in government? Do you have a relationship with the town manager or select person or the clerk? And who do you think the best person to begin advocacy with? The clerk might be a starting point, but frankly, we find often the politicians are a little bit more receptive to the message because they are more interested in the actual election process. Well, that's they have some interest in getting more folks involved, and I think the clerks sometimes feel like it's an imposition and extra work for them. Not always. Often they are our best champions. It just really depends on what your community is like. If you're able to build a team, obviously delegating is really important. So some of the next steps would be to either go through some of these questions on your own if you're working by yourself, or if you're able, you have a group of folks you can work with. Maybe have a meeting and think about these questions together. we will be happy to help if you're a member of one of the coalition organizations. The point person there who recruited you for this call, or perhaps in general, could help in directing you to other folks or to brainstorming some of these ideas with you. Eric Cashton is from Common Cause is leading our organizing efforts. So for Common Cause, that would be Eric. And please keep us informed. There is a URL here where you can talk about, you can give us a little update. And I don't think, do we have this here? Let's go. Not sure why that's not here, but we should have had on here the earlyvotingma.com is the website where all of the materials are located. Earlyvotingma.com. That's a really important resource that has all these resources for your work. And so let me just go to, we'll do questions, and I'll leave up here the contact information for the folks on this call. So we have an opportunity for folks now to ask questions. Let me just say, if there's anybody on the panel that wants to say anything at this point, you're welcome, or I will unmute everybody else. Marianne or Eric, do you have anything you want to add at this juncture?
This is Eric. I would just add that if you haven't noticed already, on your right toolbar, you should be able to access the PDF of the toolkit that we were referring to, so you can actually get that, as well as copies of this slide presentation. And I typed in the web address for earlyvotingma.com in the chat, where you can get all of that information as well after we hang up.
Yeah, there it is in the little window there, www.earlyvotingma.com. Okay, so I'm going to unmute folks all together. Why don't we actually, do you see the little part where you can raise your hand? That would make asking questions a little bit more orderly. I'm going to try unmuting everybody, but if that doesn't work, I might have to go person by person, because sometimes these calls can get very
What is currently being done right now in Boston to try and advance early voting?
I don't know why that happened. I'm sorry. So I just heard, can folks, I'm sorry, I think something just happened for a second there. I just heard a question from someone about, was that Kevin, about what's in Boston?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So a group of folks are meeting in Boston and have begun some outreach. I am actually not sure exactly where they are. Cheryl Crawford was helping to lead that effort, but I know that there have been some conversations with some city councilors, I believe, and some others. Would you like to be put in with that, connected with that group?
Yes, I would.
Okay. And are you from Boston?
Yeah, I'm in Brighton.
Okay, cool. So is Shanique there?
Yes, I am.
All right, I saw you. I'm sorry, you had your hand up for a while?
I did, but I wasn't quite sure whether or not you could hear me, so I was afraid to speak. I do have a question. I'm from Western Mass, and the League of Women Voters in Springfield, we have a meeting. Well, I have a meeting with with two other League of Women Voters representative with our mayor and city clerk. But I was wondering if if you knew of any other cities or towns in Western Mass that have said already that they're on board or is having the conversation about getting this started in their city and or town. By any chance, if you knew anything of any other places.
Well, there are some conversations going forward, and there are also some other organizations in the Springfield area that are definitely interested in this issue. So we need to, I think, have a little more connection between those. And Eric, do you remember? I know that there was some talk about the league coordinating. ACLU is also involved in the voter table. But there's a number of organizations out there that are interested in getting involved.
Okay. Is it possible that you can either send me that? I can send you my email because I might know who those folks are, and it would be helpful if there was a whole team of us, or it might be more compelling of an argument if there were other folks in Western Mass doing it. I used to be a political organizer in Western Mass, so I pretty much know every person that would be involved in something like this. I just don't know who they are right now. Is it possible to get it more?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, let's set up a little connection thread so that you can get connected to other folks in Springfield, particularly, because there are a number of others that are interested. I think that having the more the merrier is usually the best way to go about it, because they kind of expect the usual suspects, but when there's a whole bunch of folks from different areas, I think it sends a more powerful message.
Absolutely. Thank you. I've sent my email address in the comment box, the question chat box. All right. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'm sorry, I see there was a question that came and went. Anybody else have a question that they would like to ask? Dick, would you like to ask a question or say something?
Yeah, I wondered if there were other folks from Cambridge who signed up, who are interested.
There definitely were people that signed up for the call. I don't know if they were all on this call, and there are people on the call that that are on the webinar but didn't dial in, so I don't know how they're doing. I think the technology may have been difficult for some. And there are some people that may be on the call that are not on the webinar, so they can't actually speak.
Well, we have a couple people from Cambridge speaking up in the text questions box who are here, if you're interested in seeing them right now, and we can definitely make sure you guys are connected after this.
Okay, good.
Other questions? Ernie.
Yes, Ernie Fry calling from Brookline. I'm with the League of Women Voters. You've mentioned that there is a difference between absentee ballots and early voting,
Yes.
primarily along the lines, as I understand it, that the person needs to perjure themselves in order to do absentee ballot if they don't meet the qualifications. Is there any action being taken to eliminate the need for perjuring themselves? And if that is eliminated, does that would the absentee ballot serve the need of the early voting?
So it's a good question. The actual excuses for absentee voting are in our state constitution. So in order to remove that requirement would require a constitutional amendment, and the earliest that could happen is 2018 or beyond that. Yeah, 19. And even then it would be beyond that. So maybe by 2020, that might be gone. And in the meantime, early voting is our best option. Even if you do have no excuse absentee voting, early voting is typically more in person, and absentee voting tends to skew towards the mail. I think some of the changes in the early voting ballot would be important as we go forward, and there's going to be a process to have to look at that, because I think it's going to be very confusing. You know, early voting ballots have to be turned in by Friday before the election, and absentee ballots you can send all the way through Monday at 5 p.m. So there's those things are confusing. And if you had in-person early voting only and then had the absentee voting by mail because you didn't have any excuses, then that would make things much clearer. But I think there will be some confusion around that, and that's unfortunate. They will look different. The ballots will look different. They will have different colors. They'll have different sort of requirements of what you'd have to do on them. They will be counted early in a central tabulation area and not at the precincts. So I do hear actually something from Cheryl, who can't speak but on the phone, but there is a lobby day in Boston already scheduled for March 3rd, but we'll connect folks from Boston with the Boston crew soon. Did that answer your question and any follow-ups?
Well, just seems like I can't really, I mean, the absentee ballot here in Brookline is you show up at the town clerk's office at any time, and we do have evening voting and Saturday voting already weeks before. In fact, I voted myself this morning by absentee. So, you know, it just seems like that my showing an absentee ballot seems to be an early vote. But
they're very similar.
We need to look forward to, you know, eliminating the perjury results.
There is something in at the there is something in at the Constitutional Convention. Whether it gets approved or not is not clear to me. The reason why it might not is there might be some concern about the legality of the early voting provision and how those two interact. But there are many states where they have both early voting and no excuse absentee voting, and they work together.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see.
There seem to be some questions being typed up about the regulations from the Secretary of State's office, and I was wondering if you could talk about those, Pam.
So the Secretary of State is issuing regulations which we were hoping they would have issued a long time ago, as are the city and town clerks, more about ballot handling than about locations and hours, because locations and hours are something that each community by law gets discretion over. But the Secretary will be saying, and we understand that they'll be allowing something called e-poll books, so that there could be a check-in process with a laptop or a tablet, and that they will be saying they don't have to have all 6 poll workers. But none of that is in writing yet, and that does make it difficult for communities that are looking for guidance to know exactly how expensive it's going to be, because obviously if you just have to have one person there, it's going to cost much less than if you have to have 6 people there. And I can't give you an ETA for that. It should have happened a long time ago, but it hasn't happened yet, and that's rather troubling, if you ask me. Other questions?
Hi, Shanique again. I have another question.
Okay.
I see Ben's name on here with Progressive Math. What is their involvement in this project?
They've been supportive. They haven't done a lot of work. They were involved more with passing the law, but they haven't been involved with the grassroots piece of it yet.
Okay. All right. Good to know. But if I maybe need some more information, I could call Ben, likely?
Well, I think you'd better call, I mean, if you want information, that's not the place to call.
Okay.
The place to call is, is Cheryl Crawford and Mass Vote. It's Nancy or Marianne Ashton, the League, where you are. It's Eric or me, and MassPerg and ACLU have been the most involved in this effort.
Okay. Okay, good. All right, thank you. That's my last question.
Okay. And actually, Tony Mack from the voter table as well has been very, very involved too. All right, I see no more hands, although I am, for some reason, not seeing the written questions. Is there anything else there, Eric, that we need to attend to?
No, I'm not seeing any fresh questions right now. For some of these topics that people want to talk more about in depth, you can always feel free to contact us or me at ecashton@commoncause.org, and we'll talk offline when the webinar is not running for everybody else.
Okay, folks, I thought this would be about 50 minutes, which is about exactly what it is. Do we have any other questions? Marianne or Nancy, do you want to say anything?
I'm good, thank you. It's been nice to see how many people participated in this, and we'll be eager to see what people find out.
And just a reminder for people to put down when they get some results, talking to their election officials, so that people know what's happening.
And again, I would just draw your attention to earlyvotingma.com. It has a lot of resources, and you should be able to download the toolkit and this actual PowerPoint right here. We thank you for your involvement and your interest in the Early Voting Challenge and in making voting easier for your fellow citizens of Massachusetts. You're the backbone of democracy, and we're really counting on you. All right, thank you, everybody, and I look forward to talking with you soon.